I'm delighted to have as our next guest a good friend of this program, Dr. David Adler, who's president of the Australian Jewish Association and a former deputy president of the Australian Medical Association. Welcome, David.
Professor David Flint, it's always a privilege to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, it seems to me, David, that this country, the taxpayers of this country, seem to be funding terrorists. That seems an extraordinary thing. Is that your impression?
It is an extraordinary thing, and it's more than my impression. The evidence is now overwhelming that if not directly, then indirectly, Australian taxpayers are funding terrorism. And we worked very hard with the former federal government, the Liberal National Party government, to bring them evidence to demonstrate that UNRWA, which is the UN agency that provides various services, particularly educational services in Gaza and in Judea, Samaria, or the West Bank to Arab Palestinian children, that they were inciting terrorism, that they had an unhealthy relationship with Hamas, that a number of their facilities had been caught actively assisting the operations of Hamas. The LNP government of the day acknowledged and to some extent accepted our evidence and cut the funding to UNRWA. But one of the very first actions of the election of the Albanese government was that Foreign Minister Penny Wong restored the funding. And perhaps even more extraordinarily, since the 7th of October, in the first few weeks afterwards, she handed out additional tens of millions of dollars. So we think that in the current financial year, Australia has provided something around $45–46 million to UNRWA. The last tranche has been suspended in the last few weeks, simply because the US and other countries have seen the evidence that Hamas and UNRWA were working hand in glove, and they suspended their funding, so Australia did so also. And I think the average Aussie might have not a lot of knowledge or not a lot of interest in Middle East politics, which is fine, but unless you're an extremist, you would not want our money going anywhere near jihadist terrorism. So we call upon the government to not give a single Australian dollar to UNRWA going forwards.
There's been evidence, has there not, that there were UNRWA personnel involved in that extraordinarily hideous activity against Jewish people on the 7th of October, and also evidence, is there not, that under the UNRWA building there was access to the tunnels that Hamas uses for its illicit activities, not to protect the people of Gaza, but to undertake warlike activities against Israel?
Look, you're quite right. There have now been somewhere between 30 and 40 UNRWA staff identified as actively assisting and participating in the barbaric terrorism of 7th of October. There was also a Telegram chat group of some 3,000 UNRWA teachers, and just short of 250,000 messages have been reviewed, with thousands of them celebrating and supporting the terrorism of the 7th of October. The UNRWA headquarters that you referred to, below it was not just a tunnel, but were the computer servers of Hamas, and the cabling, including the electricity supply, was actually linked to the building above.
And so
they
claim to be ignorant of all
electricity for the service.
This is outrageous,
Look,
isn't it?
that's just not credible.
And the other
It's not credible. And
the other thing that I find completely unacceptable is the way in which people are being brought into Australia on visas. Visas are being granted, and obviously you can't confer with the local government as to the credibility of a person, as to whether they would make a proper person coming to Australia. There is an enormous potential here to be granting visas to terrorists, is there not?
look, to put it bluntly, David, the current government is being absolutely reckless and disregarding the highest duty of a government, which is to protect the safety and security of its citizens. Penny Wong announced in November, late November last year, that 860 visas would be issued to people in Gaza. And it was only in Senate estimates about a week ago that we learnt that that number was no longer 860, but over 2,200 visas had been issued to Arab Palestinians. And what's worse is that some of them were approved within 24 hours. It is inconceivable, it is impossible that reasonable security screening could have been done. I mean, we all know how long it takes to process an ordinary asylum seeker, and sometimes it takes many months or even years to substantiate the bona fides of an asylum seeker. To think that, a war zone, which is controlled until very recently, fully controlled by a prescribed terrorist organisation, you can screen the people and do security checks in 24 hours is just outrageous. And I have no doubt that Hamas supporters are being imported to Australia. We may well also be getting Hamas members, maybe even operatives. And for all we know, some of the people who participated in the terrorism of the 7th of October, either in the first wave or the second wave of civilians that went in to do the looting, they could be coming to Australia as well.
We've already seen...
There's a radical thought that's been going through... Yeah.
We've already seen, haven't we, David, the consequences of carelessness. I think you're right to say this is reckless, of carelessness in the administration of immigration, and in particular allowing people into Australia who are keeping and who are going to prosecute the ancient hatreds from where they came. And this is not what we want in Australia. We saw this with Ben Breaker, for example. Some of the people released recently by the government, I think they've taken a ridiculously wide attitude to the High Court's decision. They've released an extraordinary number of people who should never have been in Australia, rapists, child molesters, murderers. These have all come to Australia, and they've released them into the community.
What's been in the headlines a lot very recently has been border security and those boats that have arrived, as everyone knows. But I'd like to put in perspective what's happening with those visas, and that is the equivalence of more than 50 boats. Being the small boats that bring people to Australia unauthorised generally carry 20, 30, 40 people. So we have over 50 times that quantity who have already received so-called temporary visas to come to Australia. And once they're here, as everyone knows, they have access to publicly funded legal aid. They for sure will seek asylum and permanent residency, all at the further cost to the taxpayer. It is out of control. It's inappropriate. It hasn't been discussed publicly. There is no mandate to do this. And unfortunately, experience overseas shows that the cohort that come from that area of the Middle East are very often involved in crimes and violent crimes at that.
Just one final question, if I may, David, and that is, I noticed from the recent demonstration outside of a council that was considering an inappropriate resolution about its position in relation to Middle Eastern matters, which of course is outrageous that a council would be considering that. But there'd been some Jewish people had access, they had tickets to go into the gallery and they were being blocked from that. One was apparently attacked by one of the pro-Hamas demonstrators outside, and then the police did what they did at the Opera House. The police arrested the Jewish man. They didn't arrest any of those demonstrating or the people who committed an assault against him. What is going on?
That is a great question, and we are becoming more and more concerned about the failure to apply the law in a fair and even-handed way. I have personally spoken to the younger of the Jewish men who was taken away by the police and given a move-on order. All he wanted to do was to enter the gallery of the Melbourne City Council to watch the events. He had registered, he had a ticket in order to enter. And you would have thought that the duty of the police is to facilitate citizens going about their lawful business, in this case, attending a public meeting in the council chamber. So not only did they fail to facilitate his entry, which I would have thought they should do, but they have taken no action against those committing the violence, and it's on video. There are at least 3 short videos of what happened outside the Melbourne Town Hall this week, and there needs to be an explanation, and frankly, I think from the video, the police need to find out who the perpetrators are and prosecute for assault.
I would agree entirely. David, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for the important role that you are playing in restoring, hopefully, the rule of law in this country to what it should be. Thank you.
Thank you.